we talk a lot about units under management, assets under management, cash on cash returns, and things like that. But it was really a return on intentionality for me. I had solved the money problem. And while I can say that I was definitely concerned in March of 2020 where we were going to end up economically, I wasn't concerned that was I going to have food and shelter.
Welcome, everyone, to the Road Less Traveled Show. This is a show about people that were successful in a previous career and left that career to go down a different path. I'm your co-host, Richard Coyne.
I'm your co-host, Bill Zahller.
On today's show, we have Matt. Matt, we're so glad you're with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, Matt. Well, thank you for being on the Road Less Traveled Show. To start with, can you tell us a little bit about your background, what career you started in, and how long you were going that path?
Sure. So as a way of introduction, I spent more than a decade in sales and sales leaderships at some of the largest technology companies in the world. And how I got involved in real estate is it's not the company I work for today, but I was part of a large net new acquisition of a $10 million sales campaign. And when I saw the commission check that I was going to get, my eyes got really wide and I started asking a bunch of questions like, what do I even do with this kind of money? And I heard everything from annuities to stocks to crypto. And fortunately, I had a mentor at the time that introduced me to real estate. He's like, hey, you get tax benefits, you get cash flow, you get appreciation. It just seemed like a good asset all around for me to get involved in. And then I got that fateful call the week of Christmas that said, we're not going to give you that money. We're going to give you 2 cents on the dollar. And I never say the number publicly, but 2 cents on the dollar really hurt. And when I asked my VP at the time, like, hey, how did you come to this number? What happened here? He said, Matt, how much money have you made this year? And I told him, and then he said, well, isn't that enough? And it was at that point that I realized if I wanted to do the things that I wanted to do in my life and pursue the passions that I have and give back abundantly, that I was going to have to create other income streams. So long story short, that's how I got involved in real estate and happy to go from there.
I'm speechless. 2 cents on the dollar. And, again, the thing that always puzzles me, I've come from a sales background as well. And the thing I can never understand is why would you limit what you're going to pay a salesperson? You want that salesperson to produce, and you give them a big, amazing bonus because they produced. It does great things for everybody in the entire company because they just made a massive sale. So why would you completely demotivate, probably cause you to leave because they completely jacked with your commission? I just don't understand that mentality and that thinking. Then the gall to even ask the question, didn't you make enough already? From a sales manager? Are you kidding me? I'm shocked. I'm sorry to hear that, Matt. Wow.
Yeah. And look, I enjoyed the time I had at that company. I made some good relationships, got some good training, learned about the industry, got a new skill set and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I just knew that I was going to have to go build the income streams that I wanted to, that I needed to have to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue.
It just goes back to reinforce anything. If anybody who's ever read anything about any of Kiyosaki's books or many other authors have touched on this topic too. You really need to be in control of your own income streams. If you're working for somebody else, then you're never going to make the kind of wealth to be able to have that kind of impact on society, on your personal life that by just working for somebody else. So
yeah. And I'm a little contrary in the sense of if you like your W-2 and you feel like it's giving you fulfillment in life, by all means, go do that, right? Mm-hmm. But what you should do is diversify your income streams, because when I first got involved in real estate, I had a lot of folks that were thinking about the 2008 time period, 2010 timeframe, and they were saying, well, Matt, isn't that risky? And look, at the end of the day, I just had a multiple six-figure check just get taken from me. And I thought that tying myself to one income source would be more risky than investing into real estate.
Right. And you get to control a lot, right? With real estate, you get to control a lot. You get to pick the market you want, for all kinds of factors. If it's short-term rentals, population, beaches, popular national parks, whatever it happens to be. If it's multifamily, job growth, all that, you get your control of that. Where, like you said, in the commission check, you at the end of the day found had no control over what they decided that you should be paid versus what you'd agreed on. So it's the freedom and, like you said, able to chart your own course is very important, I think, also.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
So Matt, where are you? What path are you on now? You're obviously, you touched on real estate, but kind of what is your approach to real estate? What do you do?
Yeah, so I am currently located in Nashville, Tennessee, and I started my investment journey just investing in single families here in the local Nashville area. If your listeners aren't aware, Nashville has been a booming town for the past 10 years. So I've gotten a little bit of luck with some market appreciation there. But there was a time in 2020 when I ran out of loans, right? I went to the bank and they said, you're making great income. These properties are doing phenomenal, but you can't take out any more loans. And when I was asking them about it, they said, well, the Fannie and Freddie limits and all that sort of stuff. So I really had two roads that I could go down. I could go down this path of finding private lenders, going to credit unions, establishing banks and things like that. But like we mentioned, I work a W-2 today. I'm into Ironman, triathlons, all that sort of stuff. So I decided that, hey, it's probably better to go down the multifamily path. So since then, I've gotten involved in a number of different multifamily acquisitions, both on the GP side and the LP side. And while I really, really love that asset class and continue to have that as a base, I'm also looking at different investment classes within the real estate niche that we can explore if you want, but that's kind of where I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. What geographic areas are you looking at that you're invested in currently in multifamily?
Yeah, primarily the Southeast, right? Okay. So I think as we're going into the quantitative easing or tightening and the Fed upping their rates and things like that, that it's important to be in core markets that have good organic growth. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I don't know anything about Lake Tahoe. I'm going to go later this year, but I know that it did receive a number of people moving there from California in 2020 and 2021. To me, those people are now being called in the office, and that was inorganic growth, right? They moved there because they felt like they wanted a second home, a vacation home, more spots. Lake Tahoe is beautiful, all that sort of stuff. And the influx of the real estate prices there is mainly due to the Fed just giving out free money everywhere. I look for core markets that have organic growth, such as a Nashville, Orlando, Tampa, Atlanta, some of the bigger Southeast markets. They've got job growth, they've got job diversification, income growth, all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense. So you touched on not a funny story already, but that was your very scary story about what the company did to you. So again, sorry to hear that. But have you had anything funny that struck you in your software sales days, that kind of thing?
Nothing funny, but as we were kind of talking here, I think I've got an idea of where I'm going to take this. So I have been looking at different asset classes within real estate. And one of the things that is interesting to me is this idea of renting RVs or campgrounds, not mobile home parks, but campgrounds. And so I recently got back from a trip from Oregon last week where my girlfriend and I rented a Sprinter van and went all through Oregon and stayed at these campgrounds. And we called it our relationship defining event. Many barriers were broken if you're stuck in 200 square feet with somebody for a week on end. But through that process, I really got to also see and enjoy the experience of staying at a campground. We stayed at a campground that had no toilets, no service for your phone, all that kind of stuff. And we stayed at campgrounds that had Wi-Fi, power, great toilets, great showers, even cable hookups for the power outlets. So it really kind of gave me this experience of what people are doing in this campground investing space. And I'm coming back thinking about that more and more right now.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, it's definitely, obviously, like you said, there's all levels of service, and I'm sure some of the Spartanness of the first one you mentioned was probably due to the location where it was. It was no doubt pretty remote, but at the same point in time, there's some pretty nice campgrounds out there. I definitely, that is a big business that that we're well aware of, and again, like you said, it's very, very different than mobile home parks. It's completely different. So,
yep. And I think what I like about that is you're still getting to buy the land, but there's not a ton of upkeep on it. So once you kind of pave it all out and create your camping spots, there's not a ton of upkeep. Again, I'm super novice in this space, so I'm going to do some more investigation. But yeah, it kind of struck me as interesting.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Matt, what was a deciding factor that got you to change the career path you're on? You mentioned the commission check was obviously, I was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it sounded like before that you'd done several single family rentals, you'd transitioned to multifamily. So it sounded like you were already on a career path. So something like you were setting up for. Was there one particular thing that made you change, or?
Yeah, so there were three things that really happened in my experience through real estate. One was the commission check that we've kind of already talked about. That led me immediately into investing into real estate pretty quickly. I think it was like 3 months after that. And then both the second two other things happened in 2020. And the first one was in March of 2020, I was watching peers in the industry get laid off. There was a ton of concern around where we were going to be from an economic standpoint. My equity portfolio had taken a dip for 40%. And a lot of my peers were asking me like, wait, you're financially free. And financially free to me means that I have shelter over my head and food on my table. Doesn't mean that I'm flying first class Air Dubai to Europe or whatever. They were like, how did you do that? And so that really got me thinking about this idea of, we talk a lot about units under management, assets under management, cash on cash returns and things like that. But it was really a return on intentionality for me. I had solved the money problem. And while I can say that I was definitely concerned in March of 2020 where we were going to end up economically, I wasn't concerned that was I going to have food and shelter. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing that happened to me that really pushed me towards this multifamily further and faster was I had two incidences on one of my properties. One of them had minor flood damage on it, and it cost me like $5,000, which, I set aside reserves for that. I was fully prepared for it. That was my cash flow for the entire year on that property, right? I'm now negative on that one property. And I'll be darned, next month, I had an HVAC go out at one of my properties, which again, set aside money for it. I was ready to pay for it, but that was another $6,000, which was the cash flow for that unit for the entire year. So that's when I really got to understand, like, how can you scale this out and have multiple doors and not have this quote unquote single point of failure that we talk a lot about in technology.
Yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, Matt, as you really started moving heavier and heavier into real estate, you mentioned a limitation that hit you in the head, which was no more loans, right? We like you, but no more loans. You're at your limit. That's crazy. But anyway, is there another obstacle you can maybe mention that you had to overcome?
I would say really the fear of first investing. So when I first invested, it was pretty easy. I had just lost a huge commission check. So I viewed it as tuition at that point. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't going to go to zero. It was a property right around the corner that was a new build from the townhome that I lived in. So I wasn't super concerned about that. But then the next two or three, and then when I started going outside of my core market of Nashville and investing in a local town called Chattanooga near us, that got a little bit scary because no more eyes and ears on the property. And then the last one was really that first time you send a wire into a syndicator, you're really worried of, did I punch in the number right? And are they going to take my money and run? So happy to kind of talk through how we kind of overcome that. But those were a few obstacles that I was able to kind of overcome.
The red flag for that wasn't the syndicator's office was in Venezuela.
A Nigerian prince has a great opportunity for me.
They're always good for it.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, what was one of the first victories you can think of as you transitioned into the real estate side of it? It could be the first, like you said, the single one you rented out, but like you said, you saw some drawbacks with the cash flow. It could be wiped out in one single asset. Is there one defining moment you can think, well, this is definitely the right path. I've made the right decision. I understand now what my future looks like. Yeah,
I'll give you two. One was my first BRRRR. So for your listeners that might not know what that is, it's a buy, rehab, rent, refinance. And so I bought a property for $80,000 using private money. So let's call it, I owed them $90,000, the 10K spread. And we did a renovation for $20K. So now I'm in it for $110,000. In a year, I went and refinanced out $115,000. So I got $5,000 in my pocket for just buying that asset and renovating it. It was cash flowing $400 a month. And while that doesn't seem like a huge cash flow, the returns are infinite. I got paid $5,000 to get paid $400 a month. And that's when the light bulb clicked for me. And then the second is this concept of how do you move money in a velocity way? So what I'm specifically talking about is life insurance and infinite banking. And there's a lot of people out there that will tell you it's not great. There are a lot of people that will tell you it is great. I will say, once I read the concepts and fully understand the concept of infinite banking, it changed the way I look at everything in life. So I would say those are two kind of big aha moments for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, great.
Yeah, some of the stuff Nash came up with as a forester is pretty amazing. The thinking that he put down on paper and got us to believe in. We do some of that ourselves, so it is pretty amazing and definitely worth looking into, folks. If you're out there listening, just look it up. Infinite Banking. The original guy was Nash, Nash. I can't remember his first name.
Nelson Nash.
Thank you. Yeah, great stuff. So, Matt, as you are really driving down the real estate path and continuing to grow your portfolio and things like that, is there something funny that's happened to you along the way in real estate?
I don't know if it's funny, but it's definitely a learning lesson. So that property I was talking about, which is the best deal I've ever done with a BRRRR, I acquired it with a tenant in it. And normally that's okay. In some situations, it's really poor. And I had a situation where it was really bad. It was actually a relative of the person that owned it. So they weren't paying rent. And then when my time came to take over the property, I thought, okay, we'll just knock on the door, see what's going on, et cetera. And they're like, yeah, we'll be out in 2 weeks. Come back 2 weeks later, they're not ready. It was going into the holidays. We'll be out before Christmas time. Come back, they're still not out. So I just learned the process of how do you evict a tenant and how do you have strict guidelines that you follow that aren't necessarily Matt's guidelines. They're, the property owner's guidelines or the state's guidelines. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a funny story, but it definitely was a learning lesson. I mean, it took me 6 months to get them out and finally had to call a lawyer and say, like, let's put an eviction notice in. And within 14 days of that happening, that they were out.
Yeah. Wow. That's actually is pretty scary. I mean, the thing that we always talk about is that, look, a lease is a contract. We, as a property owner, have an obligation to provide a safe environment, and obviously, up to livable standards. And we try to go above livable standards. We try to make it a really nice place to live. But at the same point in time, it isn't a blank check. We don't have to, improve it to, the end of the earth. But at the same point in time, that resident has their part of the contract, which is to pay their rent. And I can't understand how people just don't think that contracts matter. It is pretty amazing, some of the stuff that we've come across as well in terms of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I even use the cash for keys agreement, right? Like, I will pay you $500 to move out by this day. And they said, yep, we'll do that. And that day came and they were like, oh, well, we can't move now and all this kind of stuff. So it was it's definitely a learning process for sure.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, where are you today on your journey? You said you've transitioned from the single family. I don't know if you still own some of those as well, and then into multi on the LP and the GP side, and looking at some of the RV parks now. Where are you along your journey, and where are you looking to go?
Yeah, so I still remain mostly passive in my real estate investing, and really it goes back to that return on intentionality. So the role I have today, I love my team. I love leading people. I find enjoyment in learning about new technology that comes out there. Also do the Ironman stuff, which takes a big chunk of my personal time out there. But ultimately, I'm working my way to being a capital raiser and getting involved in bigger deals as well. So I started a podcast in 2021, which has been a fantastic way to meet new people, to learn about different industries. I mean, it sounds ignorant to say, but when I first got into real estate, I thought you either bought and hold a turnkey property or you fix and flip like you saw on HGTV. What I didn't know was it's so much more than that. I mean, we're talking about different levels of campgrounds right now. So I'm on the path right now of really just building out those relationships, getting a brand out there, and then eventually doing some capital syndication that comes along with finding great operators who have great deal flow and underappreciated assets.
That's great. Nice. And what's the name of your podcast for our listeners?
It's called Ice Cream with Investors.
Okay. I like that. We'll put a link to it in the show notes down below.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So does that mean you send ice cream out ahead of recording the show?
Virtual
for virtual recording?
So the idea really came in late 2020, and I just looked around, thought the world was very pessimistic. The messaging we were getting was very pessimistic. And so I thought that through my knowledge and just kind of learning about real estate that I had knowledge that I could share with other people. So the goal was really to have interesting conversations with interesting people that hopefully take an optimistic spin on it and add value to listeners out there. So I will tell you though, my dream is that I will go to these conferences when we start having them again, and somebody will be like, you're Matt Fore from Ice Cream with Investors. Can I buy you some free ice cream? And that is how I'm going to get free ice cream for the rest of my life.
There you go. There you
Well,
go.
with the Ironman thing, you've already got the workout schedule planned, so you should be good on that side.
Yeah,
that's right. And if a guest isn't playing along with keeping an optimistic message, you can take their ice cream away. So right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Stick with the carrot.
I like that, Matt. That's great. So is there, Matt, perhaps in your real estate, perhaps in your personal life, is there something that you can share that you do to give back to try to help others?
Yeah. So I had a mentally disabled sister growing up, and she basically had Down syndrome. She was born in the 70s. So really we didn't have the testing to understand what she fully had at that point. But unfortunately, she passed away in March of 2018. But the organization that kind of helped raise her from 18 on to 39 when she passed was Humankind in Lynchburg, Virginia. So my company actually has a matching program where they will match up to $10,000 of donations to an organization that you care about. So each week I make sure, or each paycheck, I make sure that a portion of my paycheck goes to that organization, as well as I look at the end of the year and say, hey, what are my real estate profits for the year? And let's shave off 5% and make sure we do an end of the year donation as well. So great cause. They've done great things for Whitney and our family. And my hope is that that's a small way of giving back so that other families can have that same impact that they had for mine.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, it definitely, we do think that, we call it that, listen, we've all been very blessed. So we think it's a responsibility and an obligation, quite honestly, to give back to others. And again, that's a great worthy cause. And sorry to hear about your sister's passing, but certainly, it sounds like that organization was a big support to you and to her and along the way. So, yeah.
100%.
Well, man, is there something you've recently implemented in your business that's helped you scale and achieve some of your goals?
There are a couple. One, I want to double down on this concept of infinite banking and using your money in two different places. So again, it's not for everybody. You have to change the way you think. But when I started thinking about like, how can I have $1 sitting in an asset and then pull it from that asset and make it work in another place, that really changed. So there's a number of different ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be through life insurance. It could be through heat locks. It could be through S blocks, which are security-based lines of credit. Just any way that you can acquire cheap debt and move it into a high producing asset really kind of changed my mind. So today, for example, what I'll do is I'll go grab $50K from that insurance policy, put it in a syndication, let the syndication money come back to pay the loan, but also use my W-2 income to pay down that loan. So my cost of capital is like 2% on a return of 10 to 15%, depending on the asset. And that's really helped me just accelerate faster. So again, I don't think it's really about the percentages as much as the velocity of money and how fast you can spin it in a cycle.
Right. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Good, Matt. As you think about your path and what you've done along the way, is there some advice you would give somebody who's thinking about making a path change?
Yeah, I would say, and this is, you probably have heard this 50 million times on this show, it's a team sport. Mm-hmm. You have to go out there and develop a team. And it was really scary for me. Well, let me start with when I was doing single family, you could basically do everything yourself. You go contact the bank, you can develop relationship with wholesalers, with contractors, you can kind of all do it yourself. When you start getting into the bigger assets, whether the multifamily, self-storage, campgrounds, whatever it is for you, then you're going to have people that specialize in certain things. And maybe it's just because the older I get, the harder it is to task switch for me, like to go from one thing to another gets more difficult, that I think it helps to have somebody that specializes in that thing. But the one thing I would tell folks is get out there and start building a network immediately. And it can be things like being on podcasts. It could be things like starting your own podcast. It can really be as things like listening to podcasts and reaching out to the guest on those podcasts to develop a relationship and a rapport. Because now the longer I've been doing that, the longer I've been in this business, you can see how those relationships pay dividends over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're huge believers of that too. Like I said, obviously the podcast avenue, but even local, like the local RIA meetup. So actually, Richard and I met 6 years or so ago. It was a local, RIA meeting. We try to get to several, conferences that are in our lane as far as like multifamily investing, that kind of syndication those avenues. But yeah, they're great, and we've made great connections. And like you said, and we always reference this as well, as it's we're not in the real estate business, we're in the relationship business, because at the end of the day, it comes down to relationships, and how people can help each other. Like you said, definitely a team sport.
I will say the people that do that the best tend to be most successful. And I had a old VP talk to me one time around what he would do is grab a stack of business cards and put it on his desk. And every Friday he would just start at the top. He had an hour blocked off, and how many ever he could get through, he would get through. If he contacted Bill, then he would put Bill on the bottom. If he got voicemail for Richard, he would put him at the top still, and just kind of worked his way through those business cards every Friday. And I would say, like, people are doing that to me now, because I'll randomly get a message or a call or an email from someone 6 months ago, and that puts them top of mind again. So
Right.
the people that can build the best relationships will win long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What's the best way to reach you if our investor would learn more about what you're doing, what you're into?
Yeah. So I have the show Ice Cream with Investors. We just launched a website earlier this year at icecreamwithinvestors.com. It's a work in progress. I'm learning some of the nuances to developing a website and writing a blog and all that kind of stuff. But also I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you type in Matt Fore, Fore on LinkedIn, you'll see my smiling face up there from Nashville, Tennessee. And I would encourage people to reach out. I love talking real estate. I love talking finance, and I love helping people along their journey. So that's probably the best way to get me.
That's great, Matt. Yeah. Well, we want to thank you for being on the Road Less Traveled show. Really enjoyed the conversation, and we wish you continued success.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Matt, really appreciate you being on today. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Please continue to give us a 5-star rating so we can bring you more great content like Matt Fore on today's show. We'd also like to thank Park Capital Partners that sponsors this show. We also want to remind everybody about two things. First of all, we have the Park Capital Value Add Fund that is open and accepting accredited investors today. It's a 506c fund. We also have the Park Capital Partners Foundation. That is a 501c3 nonprofit. And when investors invest in one of our projects, we make a donation to honor those investors to a charity of one of their choices from a list of 15. So please join us. And again, thank you again for being on today, Matt. We certainly appreciate it. And remember, folks, the road less traveled may be calling you. We recommend that you listen and take action. Thanks for joining.